It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, or today, and I am excited. I know that 4:45. I appreciate everyone being here, and my commitment to you is that if you follow these 5 strategies, then it will be very worthwhile to you. I am going to talk about the trust gap that's been forming with AI, and to give you some strategies that have been a product of some research that I've done over the last 2.5 years. And to start, I'd like to actually have you, I'll go through our agenda, and then I want to make this interactive. And so I want you to get out your phones or a computer. But we're going to go through this interactive workshop first, and then I'm going to present some findings from this research study for you. And then I'm going to share the outcomes from those. If you wouldn't mind going to research.drumdata.ai, and there is a study that I want to say it was 3 years ago. I woke up and I was thinking about the AI, the ramifications, everything that was in the media pointing to all of the job losses that were going to happen. And we've heard this for many years now. But I have a background in decision sciences. I did a dual PhD in economics and in engineering and public policy. I studied the intersection of decision making and uncertainty. And this study, if you wouldn't mind taking it here in the next 2 to 3 minutes, is the product of this idea, which was, what do we know about how AI influences your decisions and your trust in AI to make decisions for you, even in your sleep? And so if you would take this, it's a 2x2 matrix, and on the y-axis is 0 to 10, 10 being you in your sleep would allow AI to make the decision for you fully, and 0 being you don't want anything to do with AI helping you to make that decision. And on the x-axis, on the left side, is an inconsequential decision, the right side being a consequential decision. And that's kind of this metric of, is it an important one? Is it an important decision? Is it reversible? That's what goes into this consequential score. And if you would drag these little notes which correspond to different decisions, like a marriage decision or a college decision, onto this grid, this 2x2, then you'll successfully complete this research study. And once you hit submit, you'll see your answer against a distribution of everyone else's. While you're completing this, I do want to share with you the excitement around this for me was, as I have met with many people, administered this study to many people, I found several interesting things. And one of them was that after 5 to 10 minutes of talking to someone, for the majority of these decisions, I was able to accurately predict within a very small degree of error where they would put their little notes or their pins. So I'll let you have maybe about 30 more seconds. And then what we'll do, and again, in the spirit of trying to create some interaction, I'm going to have you turn to someone on your left or right, and I'd love for you to compare your answers with them and to talk about the similarities or the differences of this activity. And so I'll give you just a little bit more time to complete this. One of the things that I'd like to mention while you're completing this as well is how important it is that we think of the impact of AI on the decision instead of just the job displacement or the task automation. And we'll talk about that today, but hopefully this opens your minds up to what this means potentially in a society where we have people that may have decision-making apathy, which is actually my biggest concern. Less so the war game scenario and more around decision-making apathy, and we'll talk about that. So if you would, let's have you pair off for three minutes or so, and I'm going to give you kind of the midpoint if you would kind of meet up with someone and then, and I don't know if we can turn the lights, if that's possible to do that, but if we can turn the lights up for about 3 minutes, and then hopefully everyone takes the opportunity to meet with somebody and chat about your experience. So go ahead and do that. If you haven't switched, we'll have you switch to the other person if that's okay, and then we can take about 1 more minute here. Okay, we're going to wrap up. Hopefully you had a good, engaging conversation. We can turn the lights down again. I hope that you had a fun experience. You know, as I've administered this to law school students, to companies, this is a very engaging experience, oftentimes because many have not even considered these types of decisions and how AI will affect them. So I'd like to, and we may, in the Q&A, I'd love to kind of explore some of these concepts together and what you learned. And hopefully you could have, after the session, you can have some more discussion about this. But there are a few findings that I'd like to share with you on this study. The first being that we are very similar. Hopefully you found that to be the case, that many of these decisions, that we are very similar in how we trust AI to make decisions. I'd like to show, and this is a snapshot from about a couple of months ago, but what we found that over time, that these decisions and the distribution of how people make decisions fits a pretty tight distribution around a quadrant system, which is very organized and very tidy for a researcher, isn't it? But for 12 out of the 15, it fit very well into these buckets, these grids, if you will, and these quadrants. And even for the other 3 that weren't in a specific quadrant, they fit within the same area. The distribution was very tight within the same area, or these 4, sorry. And what is interesting about this is, again, that we're not that different. The way that we trust AI, and we'll talk about why after these findings are presented, but I think this is a very interesting result. The second finding that we have is that generally, we don't trust AI to make decisions for us yet. And to demonstrate this, the average score, as we evaluated this, is between 4 and 5 out of 10. That was surprising to me because certainly we are familiar with technology, certainly we're understanding more about AI, especially with the way that we're innovating and the speed of innovation. Anthropic and ChatGPT are helping us to familiarize ourselves with using this technology, but yet we still don't have a lot of trust in using it to help us make decisions. Only one of those decisions had a score that was an average score that was greater than 7. And on that one, which was the route detour driving decision, interestingly enough, this has been around for many years, right? Does anybody remember what was the first year of the first commercially available GPS? If you guessed 1988, you'd be right. And the first one, and you can see this in the Smithsonian, it's the Magellan Nav 1000 at $3,000. And in fact, you can get on eBay, one best offer might even bring it down to 40, I don't know. I like this posting actually because it appears to be in working condition. It doesn't say that it is in working condition, it just appears to be. But this has been around for many years, 36 years. And yet the average score is still between that 7 and an 8. Now, of course, the GPS is much more reliable as a technology than the route detour. And certainly the differentiation there is as you're driving, then the route detour, you may think that you're better or worse than it. And in fact, I have a story for you here in a second on this. But to me, this is a very fascinating result. That's something that has been around for so long. You'd think that we'd have a little bit more trust, and yet we don't. Now, when using AI, context matters. This is probably the most important finding for you to understand for application today. And I'll explain why through a personal experience. So my family, I have 4 small kids. We oftentimes like to go to San Diego. And on the trip from Salt Lake City to San Diego, we go through the beautiful state of Nevada. And if you've been through Nevada, you know that I'm joking. It's not that beautiful. But that's the Mesquite area has had a lot of construction going on the highway. And we came to this point already well into this trip, and there was an hour delay. And if you've been in a van with 4 kids with an hour delay for a long trip, you know that this can be potentially catastrophic. And so as I'm sitting in the bumper-to-bumper hour delay, the GPS on my phone, the Apple Maps says, hey, you can save 30 minutes if you take the exit right now and go this detour. So of course me and there's a van in front of me had the same idea. We peeled out, went on the exit. We took these roads in Mesquite, Nevada, and got to this T. And what you see here, and well, what you don't see, is when we got to this T, left was back to the highway, supposed to save me 30 minutes. There were cars lined up for probably 3 miles back from the highway all the way to the right. And in front of me, which is where the GPS was pushing me to go, is what you see here. And as you can see, there's not only a gate here, but there's no way for a van to get over this terrain. And so for the next hour, so lost, the time, had to turn around, or actually it was take that left, and had to wait 30 more minutes. And this experience, the context, is that the next time that I'm in Nevada and that route detour comes up, do you think that I'm ever going to use that again? Absolutely not. Context matters. In fact, I'm not the only one. There's many stories over the years, and if you are a fan of The Office and you remember Michael Scott turning into a pond because GPS told him to go to the pond, this is what these news clippings show. And in fact, other parts of this story I haven't shown here, but even the GPS optimization, many different companies have played with that algorithm. And it was discovered that a couple companies were optimizing not for speed, but for other things like environmental impact, and didn't show that to users. And so context matters, and trust matters. The other part of this is actually shown when we look at how even in similar consequential decisions, the retirement investment and the college decision, very similar on an average consequential score, that they can be different in how much we trust them based on the decision. One can understand that a college decision, which is very consequential, as is our retirement investments, they have different attributes to these types of decisions. There's a different bundle of variables that go into how we make those decisions. Context matters. Marriage decision. Now, I like to point to this one because this is a good baseline. And in fact, if I were to start a company, it would be to do this study, and anybody that answers above the 0, probably we can refer to maybe counseling, right? But a marriage decision on AI, right, the trust, very, very strongly distributed in the bottom right. I do not want AI to make that decision for me in my sleep. Interestingly enough, the most similar trust score to this one was liking a social media post. Now, they're on opposite ends of the spectrum with regards to how consequential they are. But the reason why this one matters so much to me is actually the reason why people answered the way they did. Clearly, you don't want to wake up next to someone that AI picked when, there's a lot of things that go into relationships, right? And now you have no accountability to that decision. You can just blame AI, right? And so the reason why people rated marriage decisions so low was because of proactively what they wanted their life to look like, right? Liking a social media post was exactly a different reason. If you can think of why, you can ask yourselves right now in your mind, and I was surprised by what people said predominantly. The reason why people rated this so low was because what if it liked the wrong post? What if it liked the wrong politician's post? Or they liked something that was completely not politically correct? They'd be canceled. And so this shows that context matters. If I look at the decision, I need to understand what makes up that decision. How does somebody come up with a decision? And that is how we now evaluate these inputs and these outputs. Finding number 4, there are pathways of trust for AI and the decisions that we're evaluating. So let's look at the dating decision and the marriage decision. We know that there's plenty of apps on there to help with dating. And people are not as reluctant to use AI to help them to date someone than they are with marriage. And certainly there's a lot more consequence there, right? There's a difference, of course. But isn't that interesting that this downward to the right movement, that you have a pathway, there's a way to leverage AI in certain contexts, even within the same frame of relationships, and that we move down to the right as we get more consequential. How about retirement decisions for investments and a large one-time investment? The same thing, we have a pathway. When we have more of a portfolio, it seems like people are a little bit more trusting of AI and a robo-advisor. But that one large investment, let's say it's an oil investment and you don't support oil, or what if it's a cause that you don't want to invest in, or you're worried about the risk on a specific one-time investment. Again, you have a down and to the right here. There are pathways to trust with regards to AI and decisions. And then finally, finding number 5, even in contexts where we struggle to make decisions, we don't always trust AI. Let's look at the fraud detection decision. I think this one is a fascinating one because how often are we prepared to make fraud detection decisions? Has anybody in this room for their own data done this? Have you created a fraud detection analysis algorithm at home? Probably not. And part of the reason why is because the data. Maybe you can bring your data through the bank, right? You can access all of that data. There's ways to grab aggregated data through integrations. There's products that do that. But don't you need population data to make a better determination on whether there's an outlier and how that works? And so the population data is very much an important attribute to this decision on whether there's fraud or not. But yet people don't want AI to fully automate this. I don't know all the reasons why. Because it makes sense for fraud detection, where you still have interaction, to do this. And yet people don't trust all the way AI on this decision. So why don't we trust AI to make decisions? Why should AI create more trust than the failed promises of BI? Now, you have to understand, some of my background involves working with Fortune C-suites, Fortune 250 C-suites as a strategic advisor to them on data. Companies like Visa and Fidelity and Anthem and United Healthcare. And one of the things that I found throughout this process of working with companies on their data, forget about AI, was that there was a lack of trust oftentimes with even those. And this becomes very problematic, because if you can look at the numeric side of things, which Jacob on main stage today talked about, and you have maybe more of a black box now that we move to AI. You've lowered observability. And when we look at large language models, it's very challenging as you evaluate billions to trillions of parameters, what the output is going to be each iteration, because more data is coming in, and then it's informing what's coming out. And so this becomes very challenging to create a black box scenario, or a scenario in which we can hold everything constant, the ceteris paribus, right? And then to understand what created the delta. There's just too much going on. Well, in data, with BI, there's plenty that we can do to observe. We can see a row of data. We can see the differences. We can create observability metrics, and yet BI has, in many ways, failed much of the world, in that there's plenty of things to not trust. In fact, I've been in many meetings where even when the right data is presented, people just don't want to do something and say, I don't trust the data, and then it's enough. That's enough to just lay it to rest and let people do whatever they want to do. And so this expectation that AI is magically going to solve this problem is not a logical expectation. It's not a rational expectation, because we've just increased the uncertainty on what the output's going to be. So mathematically, the expected value here is much less in terms of this trust that we should expect. So let me validate this, because how do you do this without then bringing a number in? Well, I did poll a number of managers across companies in Utah and asked them, how much do you trust the data on your dashboards today? And the answer, 2.4 out of 10. I don't know if you feel the same way about your situations today, but if that's true, then how do you expect AI to be trustworthy, not only in an internal environment, but now in an external environment? One other maybe factor that goes into the why here, of why that score is so low. How many data breach notices did you get between Christmas and New Year's? If you're like me, I had 3 or 4. And I feel like this is happening more and more often. And what a great week to send data breach notices. That's just a perfect week, because the last time I opened mail during that week, I won't even get into this, but it's the things that people send when it's just down news. So I'd just rather burn all of the mail that I get during that week. But this is a part of the explanation, in my opinion, of why. Anytime that we have data breaches, what happens to consumer trust in data? How it's handled, how it's delivered, how it's used. It diminishes our trust holistically in the system. And this is an important factor that we'll get into in some of the strategies. And then finally, this is more of one that I still need to validate, but I'd like to bring it up anyway, which is the Jean Valjean agency theory that I have. No, I'm not friends, although I'd like to be, with, this fine actor, right? But Jean Valjean, if we go to the story of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, had a decision to make, a great moral decision. He was trying to decide, should I steal the bread to feed children? And one might say you shouldn't do it, Jean Valjean, because that's against the law. But another might say, yeah, but children dying. And the agency, the Jean Valjean agency theory, in my opinion, is, does it matter which of the decisions were picked as long as he had the decision? And I would say that maybe the biggest explanation here is more of this very important distinction between machine and human, of who is in control of the decision. When we talk about agency or agents, is that trying to mimic something that is that unique, which is that we are agents unto ourselves to make decisions? Maybe this is what is happening when we trust AI less, is because we want to preserve our own ability to be different than the robot and to not be displaced. So therefore what? So these are some of the findings. So these are the 5 things that I hope that you can apply, the 5 things that you can take back and you can actually do something about. Strategy number 1, incrementally improve trusted, and I'd call them beloved, products and services with AI. This is how you get ROI with AI. It's a magic wand that I like to refer to, that you tap each of your beloved, trusted products, and maybe even after tapping them with AI, you don't even tell people that it's AI. And the reason why you would do this is because whether it's cost efficiencies, whether it's to improve an experience, if you can establish a baseline through the adoption of AI, that's victory number 1, because now you understand where you're at. And it surprises me, after working with some of the best companies in the world, how little we still do this. And when we shoot for the moon, the ROI indefinitely goes down oftentimes because you don't establish the baseline. And when you do that, you don't even know what you've improved or if you have improved it. And so incrementally improving beloved products takes out an important variable out of this, which is the trust. It helps you to understand the elements here, regardless of the black box effects that I've talked about. And so this strategy is an important one. So I would recommend, if you go back and you look at every single type of customer experience that you have or internal operation that you have, figure out how you can tap and create a baseline with AI as an improvement on the most important ones. Establish a baseline. And then if there's positive results, then there's a couple of things that you can do, and there's a couple of things at Cinch that we're doing. First, you can ask consumers if they trust the product more after these changes, again, regardless of letting them know about AI. And so instead of an NPS score only, we're starting to use a data trust score. And so when we show data to a customer, we want to know, do you trust the data more or less? And that's the same kind of rating scale as we use for the NPS. And the second thing that you can do here is that when you understand the incremental benefit, and you have a baseline now, and you've been able to improve from the previous paradigm, you then have a better understanding of what customers need before you invest more dollars. And it may be completely sufficient at that point for a baseline that you've tried to innovate on. And why would you invest any more dollars? And so this allows you to quantify the marginal benefit of increasing investment. And so these are 2 very important things that I think that everyone should do today, is commit to doing this on your roadmaps. Second, categorize AI projects in 3 buckets. Now you can expand these to more if you'd like. but I want to explain why. There's 3 buckets that I put here: the creation plus generative, the task automation, and the decision-making buckets. I'll use an example that I use now often, which is going to Adobe Photoshop, and they have a generative prompt now that you can select with the lasso a tie or a shirt or the lighting or the background, and you can press a button and it will magically give you some options of what you can do based on your prompt. That saves me a tremendous amount of time because the effort, and I'm not a visual designer, I'm not a Photoshop expert, but it saves me a tremendous amount of time for something that I have a lot of interaction with. That doesn't require a lot of trust. It's an experience, and I'm in the loop and I'm making decisions. Task automation, let's say for a finance reconciliation, requires a whole different degree of trust. In fact, in various projects that I've done and doing these types of things with reconciliations, oftentimes you need 3 to 6 months of testing before anyone will even allow the thought to be entertained that you can now replace that process that is very manual with something else. And so the trust then becomes much more elevated compared to a generative situation. And then the decision making, even higher. When we look back to the findings from the research study, we find that the context matters here, of course, but when we are talking about very consequential decisions, an M&A, a situation, am I going to acquire a company? The trust here to do that needs to be very, very, very high and very proven before you allow something to make something that consequential of a decision. And so it's very helpful if you go back and you take any type of innovation that you want to tap with AI and categorize them, and then to establish a threshold of trust, to put some kind of number, whether that's an 8 out of 10, right, in terms of the degree of trust that customers might need to have to release this to them. If you categorize that, at least you're now talking the same language internally of what we need to achieve, and then you define what that looks like. Strategy number 3, deploy reliable co-pilots instead of pilots. Now, in the early days, there was a push. If you go back to the original branding of some of these AI releases, they were pitching a lot of pilot. We're going to do this for you. But remember, people don't trust AI. And so what naturally has happened is that we now have co-pilots. In fact, that's the branding for a lot of these products. And the reason why is because, again, Jean Valjean, I want to make these decisions, and I want to define when I want to make the decision, but it's really nice to have a co-pilot in my code. It's really nice to have a co-pilot to draft 90% of the work of an email. For an email I don't even want to write. It's really nice to have it review this for languages because then I don't have to hire someone else if I need to send this to a team that's in Asia or South America. So co-pilots and the idea behind how we innovate AI requires that we have to take that mindset, starting with people don't trust it, and how we're going to supplement their trust or their decision. Strategy number 4, simplicity, clarity, transparency, and observability build trust. And that trust, when we have elevated trust, that actually then leads to adoption. I'll go to another example here of what we do at Cinch. So we do a deduplication of, we ingest data from point of sale systems for oil change companies and for pest control companies. And when that data comes in, and we do our magic with deduplication of customers and vehicles or possessions, it's very hard for people to see into that black box. So how do we build observability and how we're just not talking the talk, but that we can actually deliver value to them, to communicate to their customers? Because that's what we do. We take their data in, and then we create an omni-channel platform that allows them to communicate with these customers based on the cleansed data. And if they don't have clean data, they can over-communicate to customers. If they don't have clean data, they can spend a lot on mailing and texts. They can get suppressed. And so it's pretty consequential that we have clean data to do this. But when we show a prospect work behind the scenes, what we do is we give back a sample list of customers to them of what we've deduplicated. And why do we do that? It's so that they can check us on our work. And this, even though we have a black box now that has created a lot of things that we don't know, by simply showing customers things that they can validate against, we've just now introduced ourselves back into the equation of trust. And so anytime that you can build observability and trust in an AI system, do it, because you need to. And strategy number 5, harming consumer trust will sink your AI product adoption like the Titanic. Build, nurture, and defend trust at all costs. So this goes back to the data breach letters. Anything that is now affecting consumer trust in your data affects everything. And this is very important for everyone to understand, which is it doesn't matter if it's that product or if it's that feature. It all now goes into a whole. If they trust you on the data, then you have a chance to then implement reliable AI solutions that will get adopted. But if you don't, and you don't treat it as a system, then you have a lot of potential for error here. So again, there's 2 things that I hope you take away from this. Number 1, context matters. And 2, trust matters when thinking about AI. And essentially, when you put these 2 together, when you optimize for trust, optimize trust within each context. Look at each type of decision that you're making as a business. Look at it even in your own life. I'm doing that with my own kids. And try to figure out what are the things that you want to optimize for in that process. Now, I want to conclude actually with a little bit more of a bigger picture. Hopefully I've given you some strategies that you can take back and implement as you think about adopting AI, whether that's a vendor solution, whether that you're building it, that you have strategies to help you. But I'd also like to speak of kind of the bigger thing, which is our own decision making with regards to how we run our businesses, with how we run our lives. And I do this because I think this is the question of our time, which is how do we preserve that unique thing, which is this agency, this decision making? How do we preserve that to differentiate us versus machine? And this will require a lot more of us than ever before. It will require that we assess our own decision-making outsourcing. And one of the ways that we can do this is that if you put on every job description that you put out from now on, include one section, which is decisions that you will be making. To me, this is responsible employment. If you now help coach people to understand this differentiation between machine and human, and you now showcase how they're different, then people will gravitate towards improving that skill. And by the way, if there's one quote that I've used more in the last 2 years after engaging in this study than any other, it's that the only way to improve decision-making is to make more decisions. It's not to watch it. It's not to read a book. You have to feel the effects, the weight of those decisions. You have to understand, as a founder, I had to, when something broke from a decision that I made, I had to pay the price. And you tend to do things differently when you burn your hand on the stove. But when somebody tells you about it, if you're hard-headed like me, it's a little different. And so every job description in the world should have a decisions to be made and a very clear understanding for every single role as to what decisions they're going to make. And any type of promotion should have a delta between the decisions that they made before and the decision that they made after. That's not a promotion if it's not. And then secondly, and this is more on a personal level, I believe that everyone should do an assessment on a quarterly basis on the decisions that you're outsourcing to AI. And I'll use one example here and then we'll close, and if there's a question or two, that'd be great. But the self-driving car is a phenomenal innovation and a magnificent opportunity for the future. The assumption that we all make is that that will replace these things that are getting displaced with higher order things? Well, decision making is very complex in driving. And as a teenager, I learned a lot about consequential decision making through driving a car. And it's not to say that every teenager needs to drive a car to learn how to make decisions. But for this teenager back in, many years ago, it really helped me. So when someone now removes that skill building exercise, do they go on the couch and use their phone more? Or do they naturally tend, as a teenager, to find higher order things? You can be the judge of that. But I'll tell you what we see today, which is a lot more kids are going to social media when they have less things that they're responsible for. And this has been a very challenging thing for our society. What we see is gap years are happening more often. People are driving less. And you already start to see the consequences of when you take away decision making on the foundational level for smaller decisions, you now start to affect the ability for people to make bigger decisions. And so if there's one thing maybe on a existential level that I'd like to invite everyone to do beyond these 5 strategies, it's to consistently commit to evaluating your own decision making and what you outsource to AI going forward and what you do with people that are around you, and refuse to allow apathy to settle in on your own decision making. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'll take a couple questions if you have some. Any questions? I know it's late in the evening here, or we're entering the evening, so. Okay, if there's no questions, then thank you.